open source AI is a set of models and artifacts that get released publicly so that they can be modified and reused. And we're going to have this discussion with 3 of the leading labs that are releasing open source models: Meta with Llama, Databricks with DBRX, and AI2 with Olmo. Now, for those who don't know, AI2 is a nonprofit research lab that produces advanced open source AI models and associated artifacts and publishes them. So these folks and others are investing really heavily in putting more control in the hands of AI developers. And to the title of this session, that's creating a counterweight to the closed models, a bit like Android did for iOS. There's tons of ground to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get it going. Each of you folks has your own motivations for releasing open source AI models. But to go back at what it is that you've written and what it is that you said publicly, there's a big theme of decentralization. So it's a 2-part question. Why is decentralization important? And what's in it for you to release these models? We'll start with you, Laurence, first.
You spent the most money, so you should go first.
It's not my money. I don't know if it's about decentralization. I think there's a couple of things in it for us. I think first, we believe that by openly releasing our models and more generally the work that we do in AI, right? Because it's not just Llama, but it's also things like PyTorch and so on, right? Like we've been pushing on open source for years, that they help us build better technology, that they help us build things that are safer, that they help us sort of leverage the community to learn things about like how to more effectively fine-tune our models. They teach us more about like safety. They help us build more efficient systems, right? So projects like llama.cpp. And we learn stuff from, like I'm sure many of you here read Local Llama. We read it too. And we learn a lot from that, right? And so that is, I think, one reason. And then the second reason is like, for our teams, it's super motivating to work on something that doesn't just benefit Meta and enables us to build great products and share those with the world, but also to have impact sort of beyond that, right? And so it's a great way to attract some of the best talent and to work on our foundation models, right? And so it's really sort of like part of our strategy to be open with these models and share them with the world as much as we can.
Got it. Thank you. All right, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, my reason for doing this is quite simple. I'm a Databricks shareholder, and I'm here to look after all of our shareholders and all of our customers, and I think that demonstrating that you can come to Databricks and build a model of the quality of DBRX or beyond, we're still the only place in the world you can come and actually do that if you're an enterprise. So it's pretty simple. I need to show I can do that or nobody's going to believe me. And you have to believe me if you're going to spend that kind of money to build this kind of model for your business. I'm an academic and I care deeply about the scientific community. And I'm really glad there are folks who have that as their sole singular mission. And I'm glad that Databricks allows me to give back. But at the end of the day, I'm here to get ROI on the spend that I'm putting into these models for Databricks' business. I wish I had $300 million or whatever it is to spend on open source models just to give away. But I'm a Databricks shareholder, and I want to do what's best for Databricks, and I think this is that.
Awesome. To us, our position is slightly different. So to us, it feels like this is probably the first time, looking back in the history of technology, that we are deploying a piece of technology at such a massive scale with such a shallow understanding of that technology. We as a community truly don't understand what's going on within these models. There's a lot to be done, a lot to be learned. So there is a big major technology gap. And the only solution that we've known that has worked really well for filling a technology gap is open source initiatives. AI was raised and born in open. So we are here today because it was practiced openly. People built on top of each other little by little till we're here. It was by no means an overnight event, despite the claims. And we are genuinely worried that if we close it up, we are hindering the innovation that's desperately needed to make the technology as it is today to something that's more mature, something that we could understand, we could control, we could predict, and we could rely And to be able to do that, there are different degrees of openness that you need to achieve. And open is an overloaded term these days with LLMs and generative AI in general. There is closed models that are behind APIs. There are models that are open weight. There are models that are open source. There are models that are like open data and model and code and checkpoints. They're all varying degrees of them, and all of them are great initiatives. We love them. They should exist. They do exist, and we'll see more of any versions of those. To us, we are after radical openness, true open approach, because if you want to innovate on this, if you want to understand it, if you want to build upon it, you have to be able to poke in every aspect of it, all the way to the data. And to us, as we're learning about this whole space, the most important piece of the puzzle these days is the data. And having actually openness all the way to the data plays a significant role.
You know, this connects something that you said to me, Jonathan, when we spoke about this offline, that open is not open weights. Releasing an artifact that people can just use however they will is not always the right answer. And there's a gradient of smart choices to make. Can you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's fun to kind of look to my left and look to my right when it comes to the question of openness. Knowing both folks and both teams really well, like I'd love to ask, turn to the left, what was your training data? I'd love to turn to the right and go, what was your training data?
Yeah, there's a link. You can actually download the whole thing.
And my training data is not open. So, who am I to, throw stones on this? There are lots of reasons for that, and you can take that up with any of our legal teams on that front. I'm sure we would love to release the training data if we could. But, for me, it's really a question of kind of what goal does openness serve for the community? Ignoring the fact that I'm a Databricks shareholder and open sourcing is good marketing, I care about the scientific community being able to make progress and being able to evaluate these models, measure them, conduct the science. I worry about a world in which we're not allowed to release models openly, at least models of this scale and this quality. And I worry about that and I work in the policy world, but I worry about that and that may just come to pass. I'm spending a lot of time these days thinking about how we still get at those goals in a world in which we're not allowed to actually release the models, and in a world where we're already not allowed for various reasons to release a lot of details about how we built the models anyway. That would be very important for someone to dissect these. It may be that we have to create walled gardens where we can invite researchers in and let them write about it, but we can't actually release the artifact, because there are risks to open sourcing. I've been sitting on what I think are really good text-to-image models for over a year that I have held back on open sourcing, both for legal reasons and because I'm sure everybody's seen the stories of kids in middle school fine-tuning these open source diffusion models to do all sorts of terrible things. There are risks. I love the idea that someone on Local Llama can sit in their basement and play with the models. I also don't think at the end of the day, that may be an overriding goal above and beyond other, important concerns we may have as a society. At the end of the day, we have to balance that, and there are lots of ways to get at these goals.
So I think if I crystallize that, what you're saying is it's sure there are going to be business and organizational and strategic motivations why you would choose one place or another on the spectrum of open to closed. But there may be, policy, first principle reasons why models should be more open or more closed.
People want to ban open sourcing models, and I think many times there are good points for why we should do that. I don't like it, but I think there are good reasons, and people have raised good arguments. I think on the balance, we should allow it, but that doesn't mean the entire argument's bankrupt.
Okay. Well, so, if I track the pattern forward of what we've seen in AI training over the recent couple of years, the next generation of models to reach the frontier is going to be very expensive. We're talking $10 billion to reach, the next frontier of capabilities. Is the open source AI community and this group of leaders, do you see open source AI keeping up with that? Are there going to be techniques to do it? Are we going to use cash to do it? Or are we going to have to think of it as a categorically different thing from $10 billion closed models?
I think we should both be looking to you.
I think sort of for us, we're going to continue to build the best models because that's the right thing to do for our business and our products, right? And so I don't know. I cannot comment on how much that costs or how much we would be willing to invest. It's anyway, sort of above my pay grade, I suppose. But I don't see a fundamental reason why sort of it would change whether these models cost 100 million or 1 billion or 10 billion. I think if you would have asked this question 2 years ago and you would sort of have mentioned the costs that it take to train these models today, then everybody would have said like, oh, yeah, so open source is never going to catch up. If you look at the trends, right, between closed and open models, and actually open models have been closing in really rapidly on the closed models, and so I would expect that trend to continue actually.
Could you imagine the strategic calculus getting flipped at some point where Meta's very, most frontier, most sophisticated models actually go closed and get offered in a different way than Llama has until now?
I mean, I cannot promise that like until the end of eternity we will always open source all our Llama models, right? But I think it's important to realize that for us, sort of like being open about the work that we're doing is a strategy. We think it's good for our business. It's not altruism, right? If it was altruism, then it wouldn't be a very sustainable thing, right? Like then it wouldn't be something that you can build on and rely on. But it's really, we believe it's sort of the best way and the most efficient way for us to make progress.
Got it.
And as long as that doesn't change, I'm optimistic that we'll continue to open source models.
I think numbers really matter here for what it's worth. You threw around the $10 billion number, which I think assumes a lot of things. My best guess, DBRX cost about $5 million for the entire program. Start to finish, maybe 7 million if you include a lot of other stuff. My best guess for the Llama 3 program so far is probably around 300 million. If I were to include both compute for actually training the models, triple that to assume preparatory compute, plus the 10 million examples that were annotated. And that's not including the 405B model because details haven't been released yet. I don't know if you're willing to speak about the cost of the Olmo project so far.
Yeah, I think the ballpark is within vicinity. I question the 10 billion number. Of course, there are business modes to be made of those claims. I go back to the fact that we know very little. This is a very early stages of a technology. We as a community haven't explored optimizing it yet to the extent that we should. There are still debates over this architecture versus that architecture. There are still debates over data or token efficiency. I think we're going to see a lot of movements where these two come together. But from our point of view, the whole point about open source is the whole community globally coming together. And I think globally there is enough interest that we should be able to build the best models out there in a truly open way.
There's also the question of scaling laws and the assumption that if you spend $10 billion, you will actually get any more than if you spend $300 million. I think that's an assumption everybody seems to make because scaling law sounds like a firm fixed law of physics, like F equals ma, as opposed to that somebody put a bunch of...
law is right there.
Yeah, law's right there, so clearly it must be, and not that someone put a bunch of points on log axes, drew a line, and said, this line will keep going in perpetuity because I hope it will, and it seems to have worked so far. And I think we've seen an interesting trend over the past year where GPT-4 came out in, what was it, a year ago, February? I don't think there's been a model that's come out that has meaningfully surpassed GPT-4 in terms of language performance, like really meaningfully done so. We've seen models that are maybe a little better at this, a little better at that, models that are certainly much faster and cheaper. But if you woke up the day that ChatGPT came out and started drawing these nice scaling law lines on the models that you were seeing come out, you'll have been sorely disappointed in the past year and a half. And that's okay. Maybe it's possible we're saturating this generation of the technology in various ways. We need to move to other modalities or other approaches if we're going to keep going toward, some people's stated goal of AGI, which is most certainly not mine.
So let's do a show of hands, and then we'll get back to narrative questions. I want to ask for a show of hands, who here thinks that open source AI models will meet or beat the best frontier models within the next 36 months?
That question's underspecified. Because you didn't say at what?
For general purpose.
For general purpose, so a model that can do every single thing, one singular model.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's going to happen.
Does anyone think it's going to happen?
I think we need to understand, the problem is that we don't even know how to evaluate these systems. Going back to Jonathan's point,
Yeah.
What does it mean to be better than something else? Right now, we actually, all of us, produce these laughable tables that are far from it being scientific evaluations. We swear by it, we raise against it, but at the end of the day, there are just so many things that are wrong with their current state of the evaluation that I don't know how to start thinking about your question. In what sense, in what way? If you pick a specific set of tasks, absolutely, it's already happening. If you talk about a generic sense, I would question, I don't even know how to say one is better than the other. And oftentimes we either go back to anecdotal episodes, like, hey, look at these 5 things, or look at these 5 or 15 data sets, each of which have their own characteristics, their own weird metrics, and now also at double-digit trillions of tokens, it's going to be a very expensive task to understand. Was it part of the training set? Was it not part of the training set? How close the training set was to the test set? What's the overlap? So in the absence of all of these things, I don't even know how to start thinking about A is better than B or not.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's the wrong question because I don't see why we should care about models that try to do everything. Unless you want one very expensive thing that is pretty good at lots of things, including your task, as opposed to one very cheap thing that is really good at your one task. Yeah. We've already seen this with the Llama family of models, where there have been phenomenal coding models coming out of Meta that are incredibly popular for that set of tasks. Phenomenally better than the actual main Llama models at that task, and rival the very best general purpose models at that task at, call it 1/100th of the parameter count. That's, if that's the metric we're looking at, can someone solve their problem better than a closed model in 3 years using an open source model? That's already true today. I don't need to wait 3 years for that.
Okay.
And there's also economic aspects of what Jonathan was talking about. Imagine you actually have this amazing God-given model that knows it all. Does it actually make economic sense to serve such a model? Because that model, at the same time, you're paying for that parameters to memorize how tall is Mount Everest. But what you're asking about is just do 2 + 2. And there is actually a big inference questions associated with that notion. Then we can talk about mixtures or not and selection or not. But there's another aspect of this that directly relates to adoption of these big models at some point in time, which directly reflects to what do you want to do, what's your task, and what's your purpose.
There's so much we can cover here, and there's a really important point we didn't get to yet, which is this notion of community and community contributions. And we've talked about it a bit, right? The community is going to sort of bang on these models and experiment and extend them. There's one thing that the community can't do, which is push the big red button to light up the level of GPU that folks at your labs and some other very, very sophisticated labs are able to do. So can you maybe talk about what are the most important roles of the community and the most important opportunities for the community to participate in open source AI?
I think sort of increasingly, like looking forward, the focus of the discussions now is very much just on the models.
Yeah.
But going forward, like more and more, we'll be building systems, right? And the models will be part of that. But in order to get to more complex behavior, we'll have to build like agentic systems and so on around it, right? And so now you get sort of a very different type of stack that you're working in, and a stack where like the foundational model,
which we know really
exactly, right?
Yeah.
Which we know open source can contribute to a lot, and in many ways like can innovate on much faster and much more efficiently than individual players in the closed domain can.
Yeah, you're drawing an artificial distinction between the folks up here in the community. I consider the community to be the folks who share their knowledge openly, completely openly, and collaborate openly. And you're staring at AI too right now, so I wouldn't draw that distinction.
Yeah, and also there's another feedback from the community that also is interesting to talk about, which is the learning from the community. I think that piece of it you cannot discount as how communities would shape the next generation of the design. Part of their feedback by how they're going to use it, and we will continue to learn a lot from those usage patterns. But the dynamics of training these models would be drastically different from within big enterprise players and within communities. One might be, as you said, a push of a button, probably a little more complicated than that. The other side would be a large set of alignments, one after the other, till you actually get to the mass that you would like. And we're already seeing signal that this is already shaping up. We're going to see more of that, both from national resources, also from philanthropic resources, but also from commercial resources who are really excited about this and see the benefit of open source, truly open solutions, specifically for regulated industries.
Yeah. We could talk about this all day, and I think we're at time. So thank you very much, Ali Farhadi, Jonathan Frankle, Maaten of Meta. Thanks to the group.